Nigeria's coordinating minister for the economy and minister of finance. From 2007 to 2011, she was managing director of the World Bank, where she had oversight responsibility for the World Bank's operational portfolio in Africa, South and Central Asia, and Europe. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala spearheaded several World Bank initiatives to assist low-income countries during the food crisis and later the financial crisis. In 2010, she chaired a successful drive to raise $49.3 billion in grants and low-interest credit for the poorest countries in the world. Before her service as finance minister in 2003, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala had a 21-year career at the World Bank as a development economist, rising to the position of Vice President and Corporate Secretary in 2002. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala was educated at Harvard University and has a PhD in regional economics and development from MIT. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the President of the Italian Republic Gold Medal by Piero Manzi Center in 2011, honorary doctors from Trinity College, Dublin, Brown, Amherst College, and Colby College, and the Universities of Port Harcourt, Obafemi Wole, Delta State of Nigeria, among others. She has been ranked among the top 100 women in the world by The Guardian in 2011, the top 150 women in the world by Newsweek magazine in 2011, and the top 3 most influential women in Africa by the Forbes magazine in 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Okonjo-Iweala.
Obviously doesn't know the Nigerian custom of vote of thanks. You know what happens is after people have spoken, then you take another 1 hour. Thanking everybody individually for having been there. You know, this could take you 2 or 3 hours in this hall. So I thought your vote of thanks was too efficient. Well, I'm happy to be here, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm trying to remember the last time I was here was probably in 2004 or 2005 when I was first minister. So I'm pleased to join you today to deliver this closing keynote address for the conference on the topic of redefining Africa, the emergence of a new African story. It's always a pleasure to be able to come back to Boston and to have the opportunity to engage with all the young minds. I feel so much energy in this room from all the young Africans and lovers of Africa who are here. The British statesman Benjamin Disraeli once said that the youth of a nation, I quote, are the trustees of posterity. So make no mistake about this. I believe strongly that the future management of Africa's economies and governments will depend on all of you here and people like you. In other words, I'm already leaving you with a sense of responsibility that it's not just to come here and listen to me, but to take away something about how you're going to change things on this continent. This year's conference is about redefining Africa, the emergence of a new African story. Indeed, there is a new African story which is emerging. During his visit to Ekra a few years ago, President Obama began his speech by reminding us that, quote, the 21st century will be shaped by what happens not just in Rome or Moscow or Washington, but what happens in Accra, and I would add, in Abuja. As well, I'm totally biased. And I'll tell you that what I say, my favorite quote is, if you're not in Nigeria, you're not in Africa. at what is happening. So don't get worried. Some people think she's so Pollyannish. She doesn't recognize the problems, but we'll get to them. Now, we all know that sub-Saharan African economies have experienced a growth spurt in recent years. Economic growth in the region has been robust, averaging almost 5% per year for the past decade, compared with 2.5% annual growth for the global economy. And while natural resources have been important, a very interesting part of this growth story has also occurred outside natural resources in the services and manufacturing sectors. A decade ago, many investors viewed African economies as some frontier markets with unknown risks. Today, Africa's leading economies are solidly recognized as emerging markets. And I actually had a confirmation of that this morning when I had breakfast with some institutional investors, and they talked about our markets as having emerged. That is very exciting. The London FTSE launched the Pan-African ex-South Africa Index in January, aimed at fund managers who want to diversify their portfolios and also tap into some of the high returns offered by African equities. Just last week, the Financial Times newspaper reported cheekily that, quote, there is a second scramble for Africa underway. Nigerian stocks have returned almost 63% in US dollar terms during the past 12 months. Kenya's Nairobi All-Share Index has returned 46%, and Ghana's market has climbed more than 17%, unquote. And although we still have serious challenges, and I told you I would talk about them, such as youth unemployment, growing inequality, and poverty, we are also witnessing the rise of a distinct middle class in Africa. The African Development Bank recently published a study which showed the rise of the middle class in Africa. The African middle class has tripled since the 1980s, with a total size of about 330 million people, or 34% of the population. These are individuals with annual income in purchasing power parity terms of $3,900 US, and who are gradually becoming the consumer class for all types of goods, such as household electronics, financial services, and groceries. This middle class is growing largely because of sustained economic growth, more salary jobs, and the growth of the services sector. So I'm convinced that there is an emerging story on Africa today. The question is, what role will each one of you play in this new story? Let me use this closing address then to make a few remarks, and then hopefully we can engage in a bit of Q&A afterwards. I'll talk briefly about three things. First, how we sustain economic rise in Africa. Second, how we consolidate governance reforms, especially governance management of natural resources. And third, discuss emerging opportunities for entrepreneurs in Africa today. So first, sustaining Africa's economic rise. We cannot be complacent about Africa's economic resurgence. We cannot be complacent. Let us not forget that this resurgence we are witnessing is being achieved on the back of some very difficult reforms, which we started on the continent in the 1990s. If you recall, many African countries had to undertake political reforms, improve their macroeconomic policies, and also introduce various structural reforms. Many countries were in conflict, and those conflicts needed to be stopped and managed. These changes laid the foundations for some of the economic growth which we are observing today. Whether you look at macroeconomic indicators or structural reform measures, it is clear that African economies have come a long way in the past 2 decades, though they still have a long way to go. First, let us look at a few things. Sovereign debts have shrunk, creating fiscal space for critical expenditure. By the late 1990s, African countries had high levels of debt, with countries such as Zambia owing more than 35% of GDP in debt, Côte d'Ivoire 109%, Ghana 123%, Nigeria 72%. Today, the region's debt to GDP ratio has declined to about 32% of GDP. How many of you knew that? Put up your hands. You see, not many people know that this is one of the strong things on which we are riding, and we thank those of our donors, to whom, or creditors, to whom we owed money, who supported the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, HBS, and for Nigeria, special debt relief. In fact, the cancellation of 18 billion in Nigeria's debt and the wiping out of 30 billion out of 36 is the singular big achievement that has allowed the economy to have breathing room. And so it has been all over Africa. So we are now in a very good place. Inflation has also declined. Sub-Saharan Africa's struggles with hyperinflation, I hope, are now behind us. The IMF has now calculated that the region's inflation rate, which was about 48% in 1994, I don't think many people even remember that, has declined to below 9%, in recent times. Financial deepening. Credit to the private sector has increased steadily in the past 2 decades, rising from about 42% of GDP in 1990 to about 64% of GDP in 2009. Our financial markets are also improving with stronger banks today and stock exchanges, which now attract the attention of global fund managers, as I just said in the beginning. Privatization programs have been an achievement. A broad range of privatization programs were implemented in the sub-Saharan African region, some of them not without problems. But in a large part, many of these programs managed to reduce wasteful public spending. For example, in the 1990s, about 2,300 public assets were privatized in sub-Saharan Africa, generating about $9 billion in revenues. For the case of Nigeria, I commend you to a chapter in my book, which I'll mention. This is it, and you have a chance to hear more about it, which is called Reforming the Unreformable, Lessons from Nigeria. Yes.